Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is the common greeting nowadays. And we're pleased to have assembled an expert panel this afternoon in my time zone at least, and that's in Cape Town. So greetings from Cape Town. It's a nice sunny summer's day today in Cape Town, with the sun shining brightly on Table Mountain. We've got a very exciting topic that we're dealing with. This is session 3 of the DCBMN AGM proceedings on day 2, dealing with innovative financing mechanisms to ramp up manufacturing in Africa and in other lower middle income countries. And I think that manufacturing in Africa has become quite topical for obvious reasons that I think many of us have heard over and over again, that the best way to provide and ensure access to vaccines particularly, or product in general, is to possibly make it yourself. But making it yourself is easier said than done. We know the challenges that we have, that we are up against. Vaccine production is complex, it's capital intensive, and it's time consuming. And we are going to focus primarily on the capital intensive part of this equation, of the vaccine equation. And we understand that in order to be able to do what we would desire and what we plan, to make this vision a reality of achieving 60% of local production in Africa, that money is required to do that. And we are blessed to have a number of experts on this call, or around the figurative table this afternoon, to share their views and perspectives on innovative mechanisms, financing mechanisms, and perhaps just ideas to provoke a different way of thinking. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panelists lined up. They will proceed one after the other, and I'll introduce them as they step to the podium. At the end of the presentations, we will then collect the questions from the Q&A box, and I encourage all participants to post your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll collect them from there and direct them to the relevant speakers, and hopefully have some productive and engaged discussion at the end of the session. So first up is Ms. Gwen Mwaba, and she's from Afrexim Bank. She's standing in for Dr. Adhering, and we'll be talking to the topic of financing opportunities for vaccine manufacturing projects in Africa. Gwen, we look forward to your remarks and insights, and I hand the podium over to you now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and a very good day to all of the participants on the call today. Just a minor point of correction, I'm actually standing in for Professor Benedict Orama, the President of the African Export and Import Bank. So without further ado, on behalf of Professor Benedict Orama, President and Chairman of the Board of Directors of the African Export and Import Bank, I would like to extend our sincere appreciation to the Chair and members of the Developing Countries Vaccine Manufacturers Network for associating Afrexim Bank with this very important event. We are also thankful for the opportunity to share our thoughts on such a consequential topic. As you know, many manufacturing vaccines and investments in pharmaceuticals in Africa have become urgent tasks given the continent's recent experience with procurement of essential medical supplies and vaccines for the 1.2 billion people in Africa. At the onset of the pandemic, there was a scramble for essential medical supplies, including PPE, test kits, ventilators, and even hand sanitizers. Africa entered the race only to find that its import orders could not be fulfilled due to export bans imposed by countries of origin of these items. And as you know, the supply chains for these goods were mainly outside Africa. Eventually, however, when prohibitions were lifted, supplies were prioritized for national use. And in some cases, the supplies went to the highest bidders. And of course, Africa suffered as a result. It took an appeal by the African Union to governments in the supply chains for special quotas to be allocated to Africa. Similarly, as it became evident that vaccines would become available towards the end of 2020, the subsequent scramble led to unprecedented vaccine nationalism by advanced economies and some developing countries, including those countries which were producing these vaccines. African countries and other developing nations were once again left behind. The challenges were compounded when institutions that had made commitments to deliver vaccines to Africa and other developing countries struggled to meet those commitments, primarily due to vaccine nationalism. So in order to manage the tight supply situation for critical COVID-19 related medical supplies and avoid competition among African countries, the African Union took a whole of Africa approach to procure these items for the continent. Afreximbank worked with its partners to develop the Africa Medical Supplies Platform, or AMSP as we call it. The platform has become a marketplace for implementing the African Union's pool procurement strategy for COVID-19 supplies. The platform is now the primary source for COVID-19 materials to Africa and currently boasts around 450 unique items on display. And I would urge all of you to browse on the platform and have a look at amsp.africa. Africa is also making very good progress on the vaccination of its population, albeit still lagging behind the rest of the world. And this is thanks to the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team, which was created by the African Union under His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa. With the support of Afreximbank's $2 billion Advanced Procurement Commitment Facility, the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team successfully negotiated a procurement contract for 400 million doses of vaccines for African countries, and deliveries of these vaccines actually commenced in August. Given these experiences and the narrow escape by the continent, we must increase our resolve to strengthen institutional capacity and deal effectively with future pandemics. Therefore, we must increase investments and provide appropriate policy support for pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa, and in particular vaccine manufacturing within the continent. At the height of the pandemic, Afreximbank, in collaboration with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, created a 200 million facility to support the production of medical supplies within the continent. It is the goal of Afreximbank to aggressively upscale its financing support towards pharmaceutical manufacturing and vaccine production within the African continent. In addition to financing, the success of vaccine production in Africa will largely hinge on robust policy and advocacy support for the African Union and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, as well as African governments that will push for bulk purchases of these vaccines by the WHO and other agencies under their own vaccination programs. Their efforts should therefore be channeled to push for developed countries to ease the intellectual property rights protections to allow African countries to manufacture these vaccines within the continent. This is important if we are to vaccinate a sizable proportion of the world population within the shortest possible time. At a recent seminar hosted by the World Trade Organization, Afreximbank called on the WTO and other multilateral agencies and governments of developed countries to consider policy reforms and allow Africa to develop internal capacity for vaccine production. And I would like to call out some of the specific proposals that the bank made to WTO. First, the WTO can contribute to ensuring that more vaccine production is stimulated. And in this regard, the WTO member countries should quickly reach an agreement for temporary waivers on the patents and intellectual property rights to enable developing countries to manufacture and distribute vaccines. The WTO should also encourage its members to ensure that stringent vaccine export restrictions in vaccine manufacturing nations are lifted and work to ensure that no restrictions are introduced for vaccines and associated supplies. This will help ensure that globally integrated supply chains continue to function and facilitate the ramp up of production. More generally, steps should be taken to limit all forms of policy-induced disruption to the supply of vaccines and their ingredients, and assure the availability of key qualified personnel, including through their cross-border movement, as well as internal and cross-border trade facilitation. Finally, given the subtle and covert nature of restrictions that are emerging, the WTO should step up its monitoring capacity on government policy, particularly export restrictions, beyond traditional measures. Multilateral rules around these should be agreed to ensure fair and equitable access to vaccines for all countries. The health imperative for investments in pharmaceutical manufacturing in Africa is reinforced by the substantial market opportunities that are emerging under the Continental Free Trade Area. The single market now allows pharmaceutical manufacturers to trade their products, which are certified by the Africa CDC, in the larger African market of 1.2 billion people. Africa's countries with large pharmaceutical industries can begin to take advantage of these opportunities. The Afreximbank Intra-African Trade Fair provides a unique platform for manufacturers to showcase their production to the African continent, and we therefore invite them to participate in the forthcoming trade fair, which is taking place in Durban, South Africa during the period November 15 to 21. In addition to this, Africa must aim to strengthen its own institutions. For instance, the Africa CDC has proven itself in providing continent-wide support for managing pandemics. The AU and African governments must continue to give it the necessary investments and other policy support for it to become the ultimate reference point for health-related matters on the continent. Further to this, African governments must increase investments in building quality healthcare infrastructure, equipped with modern technologies capable of dealing with today's complex medical conditions. On our part, Afreximbank, in collaboration with the King's College Hospital of London, is developing an African Medical Center of Excellence in Nigeria. The tertiary care hospital will offer opportunities for Africans to receive top-notch healthcare treatments in Africa. Similar projects will be developed in other sub-regions. And aside from these, Afreximbank is also helping African countries to build new or expand and equip existing medical facilities with modern technologies and equipment, and to meet the growing health needs of the population. For instance, the medical facility which we created in Liberia was central to the country's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As I close, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I would like to note that the bank is ready to discuss specifics of our support and financing packages with members of the developing countries' vaccine manufacturers network. Once again, on behalf of President Orama, I thank you for the opportunity to participate in your 22nd annual meeting, and we wish you very, very fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Gwen, thanks so much for those remarks, and my apologies for getting it wrong at the beginning. Yes, indeed, you are from Afreximbank Bank, and Gwen is the Director of Trade and Trade Finance. And thank you for highlighting the bank's preparedness to engage with manufacturers to expedite the capacity building progress and ensure that we do make a difference in terms of global supply of these much needed products. Thank you so much, Gwen. I'm going to move over now to Mr. Sergio Pimenta, who is the Regional Vice President for Africa of the IFC, and he'll be sharing some remarks with respect to the World Bank's financing programs for boosting COVID-19 vaccines. Sergio, over to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, and good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sergio Pimenta, as you mentioned. I'm the IFC Vice President for Africa. And IFC, as you probably all know, is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So I'm very happy to be here to have this opportunity to talk today at this annual meeting of the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network. And I do believe that more than ever, it is vital to come together to help countries strengthen their access to vaccines to both respond to COVID-19, but also to other diseases. Supporting vaccine manufacturing in countries in Africa is a priority for IFC. And along with our colleagues at the World Bank, we are accelerating our efforts to ensure that more vaccines are produced in Africa for Africa. The COVID-19 pandemic has severely impacted the continent, exposing gaps in healthcare access, disrupting trade, and affecting livelihoods. COVID-19 has also revealed Africa's dependence on international supply chains for pharmaceuticals and vaccines, which are fundamental for disease prevention and recovery. So to reduce reliance on vaccine and medical supply imports, Africa has a goal to be more self-sufficient in the manufacturing and distribution of pharmaceuticals, vaccines, personal equipment, personal protective equipment, and medical equipment to safeguard health and economic security. This is a very positive goal. The World Bank Group, including IFC, is working proactively to support governments and private sector in achieving this goal. As part of this work, the World Bank is making available $12 billion for the acquisition and the deployment of vaccines. As of September 30th, the World Bank has approved operations to support vaccine rollout in 61 countries, amounting to $5.8 billion. At IFC, we are complementing country vaccination programs by working with the private sector and governments to support Africa's regional vaccine production development and access to other treatments. So this is what we're doing. We're doing this by improving health, helping improve Africa's healthcare infrastructure, increase local and regional manufacturing of vaccines, pharmaceuticals, APIs, and personal protective equipment, and strengthen procurement processes for vaccines, other pharmaceuticals, and medical equipment. The private sector has a critical role in helping speed the production, availability, and take-up of vaccines and treatments for COVID-19 and other vital health needs. We're delivering a number of initiatives across these pillars of support. And let me mention those. Sorry, let me have a sip because I have something in my throat. Here we are. In May, IFC announced the Africa Medical Equipment Facility to help smaller healthcare providers across Africa access essential medical equipment. This includes partnering with financial institutions and equipment manufacturers. This program is open to other partners, both on the equipment side and as well financial institutions. And IFC is taking part of the risk when providing these equipments to smaller clinics and smaller hospitals and smaller health providers in the continent. Also in June, the World Bank Group announced that the World Bank and the African Union are partnering to support the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Team initiative with resources to allow countries to purchase and deploy vaccines for up to 400 million people across Africa. This supports the African Union target to vaccinate 60% of the continent's population by 2022. Also in June, IFC announced the mobilization of €600 million in long-term financing for South Africa's So for South Africa's Aspen Pharmaceutical Holding Limited, the only Africa-based contract manufacturer of the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. IFC helped bring together other development partners from France, Germany, and the US to increase our impact. And this is one of the aspects of our work, is that we are able not only to finance this type of investments and projects, but also to mobilize funding from other partners. We are also partnering with vaccine manufacturer and non-profit healthcare foundation Institut Pasteur de Dakar in Senegal to expand its capacity to produce vaccines for COVID-19 and other diseases. And last month, we agreed with the government of Rwanda to develop vaccine manufacturing capacity in Rwanda in an effort to expand vaccine production in Rwanda and across Africa. So in addition to these projects already announced, we are actively working on a number of other vaccine manufacturing projects in other parts of the continent to bring development institutions and the private sector together to expand manufacturing of vaccines in Africa. And what we've seen through these initiatives is how important partnerships are. So going forward, it will be crucial for development financial institutions and governments to work collaboratively to ensure a coordinated approach. In addition to financing vaccine delivery and manufacturing, we must also work together to improve the investment and regulatory framework for new vaccine manufacturing plants and facilities, helping them to be economically competitive during and after the pandemic. Despite the toll that COVID-19 has taken on Africa and the world, it has created an opportunity to accelerate Africa's transformation. It has demonstrated the defining role the private sector can play in instigating lasting change and shown us that partnerships are key to success, not only to pursue a resilient recovery, but to lay the foundations for stronger vaccine manufacturing development. I am convinced that Africa's recovery will be an opportunity to create a stronger, even more resilient continent. At IFC, as we continue to work with pharmaceutical developers and manufacturers, investors, governments, and non-profit organizations to improve the investment environment, to support the development of high-quality healthcare facilities and services and production, and to access vaccines, we will remain committed to this cause. By working together, we can bridge market gaps, improve local manufacturing and distribution capacity, and support public-private partnerships to strengthen healthcare resilience. So I'm really looking forward to discussing with you today these opportunities to collaborate. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sergio, thank you so much. And as Gwen, thank you for sticking to the time allocation perfectly. I think that there's certainly evidence that the IFC is not only talking, but you've got projects on the ground already, certainly on the African continent, but hope later. So thanks, Sergio, for those remarks. We now move on to Professor Robin Shattock, who's the head of mucosal infection and immunity at Imperial College London. And Robin, I know, is involved in many, many different things related to vaccines and other interested areas. But today, Robin, I believe you're going to share some thoughts and remarks with respect to capacity building in lower middle income countries and what you and your group are doing, and some thoughts about the future as well. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And I hope everybody can see the slides and hear me clearly.
We can see the slides. Would it be possible to put it on presentation mode so that they appear a little bit bigger? There we go. Excellent.
There we go. So I'm going to talk to you today, again, along the theme of partnerships, because I think partnerships are really critical in terms of vaccine manufacturing, whether it's readiness, but also ensuring that you continue to have technological advances feeding into the manufacturing process. So as an example, I'm going to talk to you about this grant that was funded by the UK government to set up a future vaccines manufacturing research hub to partner on a technological basis with different manufacturers in different parts of the world. And I think it provides some nice lessons to think for the future as to how such a kind of scheme could be modeled or expanded to accelerate vaccine capacity and vaccine technology. So we set up this vaccine manufacturing hub and spoke model. It was principally established in the UK because it was funded by UK, but partnering academic and industry and institutional capacity with partners in different parts of the world to work on shared projects, but also to start to look at how to pump prime new technology and look at technology transfer. And so you can see the number of groups that were involved, and critically, this was done with DCVMN as an essential partner to broker those relationships and to allow us to interact with members of DCVMN. And that was extremely valuable and shows immediately a good partnership model. And we were set up really to recognize that in terms of the need for vaccines, the market in terms of need is rapidly growing in low and middle income countries. And really COVID-19 has only furthered to show the spotlight in terms of the inequities of being able to get access to emerging and new technology. And a very ready example of that would be RNA-based vaccines, for which there is no vaccine manufacturing capacity in the African continent, certainly at the beginning of COVID-19, and we hope that that will be something that will change very rapidly in the future. We were very much set up to bring new and emerging technology to different partners. And so we were looking at bacterial-based platforms, one of those being the GEMMA-based platform, recombinant proteins produced in baculovirus and yeast production facilities, and then also looking at RNA technology. And at the time that we were established, which is 5 years ago, RNA technology was seen as a very new and very risky technology. And of course, the COVID pandemic has really validated that technology now as coming of age and perhaps being transformative. And so we worked in specific partnerships with certain companies that we had already identified, partnering on different projects and different technologies, as shown here, but underpinning it, providing expertise in process optimization, research and development training, quality assurance and control training, and formulation stability, and vaccine-specific modeling tools. And we're able to disseminate those to different partners. So we like to think of this as bringing low-hanging fruit and looking to introduce it to the betterment of manufacturing as rapidly and as quickly as possible. And to that end, we were involved through DCVMN in running a number of workshops shown here, particularly the supply chain workshop that was held in Hanoi and had over 50 people attending, but also virtual workshops. And then also working through a pump priming strategy where we were able to give small grants to a number of companies following a review process through DCVMN to allow technologies to be developed and accelerated. Now, this was of modest scale, but I think, again, it was something that appeared to work well and could be expanded in the future with relevant funding. So I think in terms of what we learned from this approach is that the closer and more intimate the partnership, the better value it provides, the faster we can see technology be transferred. And I think in terms of thinking about manufacturing, particularly in the African continent, we need to remember that actually manufacturing is more than just patents. So while there is a degree of discussion about patent waiver, I think of far more value is actually the know-how in vaccine manufacturing and production. And actually having a patent waiver without the know-how is probably less valuable than having a licensed patent that comes with the know-how to enable the manufacturing to proceed at speed. So I hope that's given you a quick insight into one type of model that can be used in terms of partnering with people working upstream in terms of technology innovation and moving it downstream in partnership with different manufacturers in low and middle income countries. And I'll thank you there for your attention and look forward to the question and answer session.
Excellent. Thanks, Robin, for that overview of the marvelous work that you do as part of the Future Vaccine Manufacturing Research Hub. And we've certainly connected with you, and we are familiar with your relationship with DCVMN as well in terms of the training opportunities that you've provided. So we'll move on now to Dr. Calvin Lee, who is the director of Nimble, and he'll describe what Nimble is to you. And he'll be talking about supporting capability in HR resources. Calvin, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon and good morning, good evening. I want to start by thanking the organizers for the opportunity to be with you all today, albeit virtually. I want to actually follow up some of the themes that we've already been hearing about. I appreciated the comments about the value and the importance of partnership. I think that's critically important, and that's going to be a theme that I'd like to raise in my discussions. And I also want to also echo another kind of perspective that was just shared, that technology and patents and even funding is one piece of a solution, but if you don't have some of that know-how, as was just reflected, and if you don't have some of that workforce in terms of the human capital and the human resources, one's ability to respond is perhaps somewhat limited. Nimble is short for the National Institute for Innovation and Manufacturing Biopharmaceuticals. We are a US-based large-scale public-private partnership focused on biopharmaceutical manufacturing innovations. That said, we recognize it is certainly a global industry and a global community, and we have a good number of partnerships with relevant organizations, including DCVMN, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and others, to ensure global access to technologies and the medicines and vaccines that are derived from bio-based manufacturing. On the next slide, I'd like to begin by framing out what we see as the situation, and this will be a balance. This remarks will be a balance between what we see here in the US in terms of lessons learned and how we think it may apply more broadly to developing nations. One of our close partners at North Carolina State University led a project funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to look at some of the training and workforce development needs of 19 companies within developing countries' vaccine manufacturing network. And there were a few takeaways from that analysis. It turns out there are many similarities between the needs amongst developing nations and the needs in developed countries, higher income countries. That is a need for talent and the challenges that one finds with retaining talent associated with vaccine manufacturing. There is a reliance on hands-on training for the majority of technical staff who would be doing manufacturing operations, quality analytics, and so on. And there's a need for training in some of the emerging technologies, whether it be automation, whether it be data science, virology, or some of the approaches for mRNA vaccine manufacturing. Now, that said, even though there are some challenges, there are certainly unique challenges that exist amongst lower and middle income countries. And it's very difficult, I think, to generalize a solution because there are many differences amongst the companies and the manufacturers themselves in terms of the types of products that they're trying to bring to various communities. There's differences in the facilities, there's differences in the operations, and there's differences in the training programs that companies have established. Of course, there are regional language and other kinds of cultural differences that have to be accounted for when training a workforce. And there's a lot of unevenness between the in-country talent base amongst countries in various developing nations. So there really is, I think, a lot of unique challenges where low and middle income countries have to identify solutions. And I think, as you'll see later on, we really feel that partnerships and collaborations are probably the best, most effective way to move forward. So there are a lot of organizations that said that are very invested and willing to invest in ensuring that the vaccine manufacturing workforce is developed and is available to all nations that need it. On the next slide, want to just reflect some of the trends that we're seeing around the development of skilled talent and how the need for that talent just cannot be overstated. We certainly believe that the need for skilled talent will continue to increase. It's not just a question of where we were pre-COVID. It's not just a question of where we are today in the COVID world, but it's looking forward as infectious disease continues to be a problem. And as new modalities for biomanufactured medicines become more available, become lower cost for manufacturing, and as we think about how to make those medicines and therapies more broadly available to the global community. So the total need for talent is going to increase. It's not just research positions, it's not just engineers and biologists, but it's a variety of roles from manufacturing operations through to some of the corporate professionals that have to organize and lead some of those facilities and organizations. And we're certainly seeing that adaptability in the workforce is truly critical, that the technologies and the modalities are changing over time. And so the next generation workforce needs to be adaptable to those technical realities. They need to be able to pivot in their thinking. They need to possess a strong learning quotient, as well as a strong intelligence quotient and emotional quotient to deal with the ever-changing realities in this space. And certainly non-traditional pathways have to be considered to try to meet the ever-increasing need for skilled talent. Organizations have to begin to embrace new ways to identify how individuals can demonstrate their skills. Here in this country, we are increasingly thinking about different ways that people can be credentialed or certified or badged, how we can implement more broadly apprenticeship programs to give individuals the chance to demonstrate their capability in the manufacturing environment. And the small text on the right are just some examples of what we are doing within our community. Some of these are scalable broadly, globally. Others are a little bit more focused on needs within our community. But really, this is all about what we can do to think about different ways to identify and train talent to be working in manufacturing operations and ensuring that the talent pool exists and is growing to meet the needs of our country and other countries around the world. On the next slide, want to reflect about some of the more specialized hands-on training centers and regional partnerships that we are seeing are driving success. Again, I'll admit this is more of what we're seeing locally here, but there has been a rise in time of facilities dedicated to workforce training, short course development for hands-on skills development. How do you run a bioreactor? How do you run downstream operations? How do you think about doing some of the analytics necessary for bringing vaccines to market? We're finding in terms of success factors that there's a lot of benefit from having the companies lead the initiatives and identify what skills they want. That there needs to be strong institutional support from the organizations that are hosting these training centers, that collaboration across the training centers becomes very important, that once you find a curriculum or a short course that is working very well, you want to try to scale that across different training centers in different regions of the country, and that having access to industry scale equipment becomes really critical. You can't just do this only in a lecture style format. You can't do it only in a virtual reality environment. You need to really benefit from having hands-on with relevant equipment. Now, that said, there's a lot of challenges that we see. Staffing and turnover for the people doing the training becomes very challenging because often these are run by nonprofit organizations. And frankly, the compensation that industry is able to pay is generally higher than some of the nonprofits can afford. Equipment maintenance and regular upgrades to reflect the latest technologies is a challenge. Throughput becomes limited because you can only train a certain number of people effectively at a given time in a given cohort. And then there are a number of competing priorities that we see amongst some of the training centers that are highlighted here, where there's a balance between workforce training and developing the human capital, as well as performing some services for vaccine manufacturing or even doing research in vaccine manufacturing. So on the top right, I'll just reflect that what we're finding is important is train the trainer to ensure that successful curriculum can be transferred between centers, and upgrading of equipment becomes important to ensure that the latest technologies are available to do that training, as well as catalyzing new partnerships. The next slide talks a little bit about how the pandemic has jump-started the use of new learning technologies. On the next slide. And what we're finding is that there has been great learnings around the world about going to online teaching as a replacement for certain elements of in-person training, and we're trying to leverage that as best as possible. There are now much more availability of video libraries to augment online classes and increasing use of virtual reality and augmented reality solutions. And I think this is an important part of the future for doing some of the background training, but it can't replace the in-person hands-on experience. And so I think there's a lot of opportunities that have arisen despite the challenges of the pandemic that have really driven new training opportunities for the future. And we're looking forward to how some of that can scale. But to come back to one of the earlier challenges, language barriers, I think become a particularly important challenge. Just because you have online content, you want to make sure that can be delivered to a global community and done in a way where people can receive that content as easily as possible. The last slide, I'll just close with some comments about what we see as the opportunity around global collaboration for human resource development and success that want to reflect. First, there are a lot of organizations that are invested in and talking about this manufacturing workforce, whether it's the WHO or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and many others. We certainly believe that in-country success is going to require a good understanding of best practices and who is doing what. Certainly, the value of understanding site-specific staffing plans and specific technologies and manufacturing needs, trying to map region-specific talent supply, as well as educational and workforce development ecosystems is critical. The establishment of partnerships between experienced training centers and in-country ecosystem partners to ensure that people can ramp up their training as quickly as possible and as effectively as possible. There needs to be investment, not only in manufacturing capacity, I would argue, but also in the infrastructure to train so that you have a sustainable future. And I don't mean sustainable from an environmental perspective, but I mean it from a workforce perspective and a capacity perspective for workforce. To have that capability on an ongoing basis, you need to have the talent to do it. And there are many opportunities in terms of curriculum development and sharing of successful curriculum that we want to play a part in, that I know the community wants to play a part in. And so with that, I'll close my remarks and thank you for your time and your attention.
Thanks a lot, Kelvin. Very, very interesting, and I think very relevant interventions that you've mapped out, and it certainly resonates with those of us on the other side of the fence trying to build a workforce. Thanks so much. Now we move on to Mr. Lin. ESCOSTA, he's the CEO and founder of ESCOSTA, and Lin will be speaking to us on the topic of CMOs, an essential component of the value chain. Lin, welcome, and over to you. If you could put the presentation on. Excellent. Please proceed. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Axel. Thanks to DCVMN. I hope everyone can hear me clearly and see the slides.
Perfect.
So, many of the speakers have already mentioned on CDMOs and us being an essential part in terms of providing technology. And this is where we can actually, as a CDMO, provide one of these big missing links. ESCOSTA, as a CDMO, we are one of the few companies that actually have a full office in South Africa, and we are there to be able to provide our services to the African continent from South Africa as our hub. This is just a disclaimer, which I'll just skip. So really the role of CDMOs, especially, let me just minimize this, role of CDMOs, especially in this pandemic, really ranges from self-sufficiency, which actually cuts across as doing contract research, but also in the diagnostic front, vaccines and therapeutics. So typically, we are for blood itself, and because there are so many strains, but from blood itself, we are able to isolate from sera the antibodies, and this is then goes to an antibody discovery lab, and there's vaccine development that's done in parallel from the typical attenuated vaccine formats to then new mRNA vaccines. We then determine suitable expression platforms, whether it's a fermentation based in yeast or using our adherent time motion on suspension, or in the case for mRNA, it's in vitro transcription. Then we scale it out, and then we tech transfer actually. In parallel, actually, some of these are then used as diagnostics to be able to produce all of these diagnostics. So the role of a CDMO, this example of enabling diagnostic actually. This diagnostic actually is an immune tracker, and it allows tracking of the different variants of COVID-19 using generic lab consumables and generic lab equipment for ELISA. This multiple tracker actually shows whether there's a neutralizing antibody protection specific to patients, and this can be tracked across the various vaccine doses from the first, second, and then to the next vaccine dose. So this enables beyond beyond vaccines in a way. It enables to see when you need a next vaccine booster dose in that sense, and we play a part in helping to scale up this kind of enabling diagnostics. So this is just an example of across the different variants and a readout of the report, and from this you can trace the neutralizing antibodies. So actually, beyond helping in vaccine self-sufficiency, a lot of these technologies can be used to open up the borders as the world goes back to normal and traveling across borders becomes common. So these kind of platforms can also be used for population cohort to see when to trace across the different variants, age, race as well, and basically when to boost. So this would help to also see beyond enabling vaccine self-sufficiency on how much capacity is needed to further scale up, right? Actually, for within the African continent itself. So where do CDMOs come in? We really help the companies or NGOs to overcome the valley of death. So we provide the highest yield, affordable cost, linearly scalable quality by design with freedom to operate. And really, we play a part in one of the most difficult portions in a vaccine development, which is translating from animal studies in this process valley of death into phase 1 to 2. And then we tech transfer out actually to the client sites, or actually in a lot of cases, as we are seeing, and we're involved in many vaccine self-sufficiency projects around the world, including BMIC in UK and a few other places. But the vaccine sites are then actually for phase 3 and commercial are built in parallel as these early stage clinical trials are being carried out. So we play this valuable role in providing the enabling technologies to help scale up and translate a lot of the bench work, providing the protocols, which then we tech transfer locally. In this case, that can be done to the LMICs on the African continent. So this is a common landscape actually for and use cases of COVID-19 therapies. Beyond vaccines, actually, we also play a role in terms of antiviral therapy, antibody therapy, and anti-inflammatory therapy. So this is across the different types of severity of COVID-19. whether they are hospitalized or it's just a home-based recovery, which at least in Singapore, we are moving towards a trend of a home-based recovery and having palliative care to ease the burden on the healthcare system. So these are just examples of different COVID-19 therapies. For Merck, Molnupiravir, which the drug substances are made by various CDMOs actually, but then the final capsuling is done. Various monoclonal antibody therapies as well, such as from GSK or Roche Regeneron, and there are repurposed antibody drugs as well, like tocilizumab, which beyond vaccine self-sufficiency, of course. Then this is another area in which there should be CDMOs can play a part to further help in being able to scale up. So for us as a company, we have end-to-end across from small molecules for APIs in that sense, as well as to injectables, in which the biggest trend is in inhalation-based vaccines, right? And then there are a lot of antiviral therapies in tablet or capsule forms, and there are new modalities or other drug delivery systems like oral disposable films or tablets as well for oral vaccines. We also have a microbial process actually which is using Picaea, and they are actually open source vaccines. For example, in Peter Ho test that works with Biological E in India as a scale-up partner. So his RBD 21921C1, which is a subunit vaccine, but actually expressed in a yeast, which is very easy to scale up, and is one possible subunit vaccine that can be used for vaccine self-sufficiency within the African continent. As other mammalian based on new modalities such as mRNA may be more complicated to scale up. So we have new operational paradigms from moving from traditional CDMO to actually to operate as a kind of a design, build, operate, and transfer. So this would help solve issues in terms of manpower, train the local talent pool in that sense. So we actually operated under contract for a period of, let's say, 2 to 3 years, and then we transfer locally to the local partner. So this allows us to tech transfer all of the GMP protocols and the know-how and enable vaccine self-sufficiency. So we have different manufacturing platforms. This is of course a suspension-based, which is used for antibodies as well as maybe more traditional subunit vaccines such as RBD protein. So this is our adherent-based platform, which is using Vivo cell, which is a very common vaccine. So this is more common for live attenuated influenza vaccines or other attenuated vaccines. So this is our technology enables very high yield and very affordable costs, and we have a very simple single step, typically chromatography and formulation into either glass COP vial or inhaled format. So we have many manufacturing or enabling platforms and tools which are very relatively low cost. So this platform is used actually for already 8 commercial human and animal health vaccines, including one COVID-19 vaccine. Then as for mRNA and LNP and what is the role for CDMOs? CDMOs, this is a typical process for mRNA and LNP vaccine. CDMOs typically come in to help in the intermediates or the supply chain, right? Especially for the plasmids. But as the site is being built for mRNA or LNP, this is typically done by the biotech company and up to the drug substance stage. We actually help in terms of one of the biggest bottlenecks, which is formulation to LNP. Of course, there are many groups like in USA, Nimble and others that have helped to some of the freedom to operate issues in terms of having better tea mixers for the LNP portion. But we also typically come in to help in the LNP formulation that has freedom to operate, and then we tech transfer this critical step because this is one of the most difficult formulation steps in making the mRNA vaccine. And the large-scale drug product, this may be done also by the CDMO itself for very large scale potentially. This is an example of a company for mRNA LNP that is specifically within the African continent. And this company, which is a Carbide Startup, has a fraction of cost of the mRNA LNP, which is less than $10, and optimized across the different variants. So this is a tech transfer model in which you are targeting really the African continent and low middle income countries at a much affordable cost. Of course, based on Peter Hotez's reports, then the cost of their subunit vaccine is $1.50, whereas this as an mRNA vaccine is still $10. So there are other, we come in also for other enabling technologies. This is an example for Exosomes, which is used for COVID-19 treatment potentially to reduce cytokine release storm for patients who have severe symptoms. So yeah, we are CDMOs play various roles, and to paraphrase from James Earl Jones in Field of Dreams, we if you build it, it will come, right? So we are here and very open to share our technology and to help enable vaccine self-sufficiency, especially in the African continent and lower middle income countries. So thanks for your listening, and we look forward to collaborating with everyone. Thank you.
Excellent, Lynn. Thank you so much for that overview of ESCOSTA. There's certainly a broad offering of service and access to technology. Time is moving on, so I'm going to move across to John Pearman now. And John is going to talk about breakthroughs in VVMs. He is the supranational coordinator at Temptime. John, over to you. Over to you.
Thank you. Can you see the screen? You can see the screen? Can you see the screen?
John, please proceed. Yeah, we can.
Thank you. Okay, so welcome to the Temptime Zebra update. I will be providing a short update on VVM for COVID vaccines and the digitization of temperature sensors. Now, you've all seen this slide already from WHO on the COVID vaccine coverage, and obviously green is good and red is bad, and mainly in Africa, where the supply shortage has been to date, has limited coverage to well under 10%. It's worth bearing in mind these same countries will have the challenges in supply chain, which is yet to be really tested with the vaccine supply in small quantities so far. However, there is a huge increase in COVAX shipments forecast, as we've seen already, 1 billion doses in Q4, another billion in Q1. COVAX being the main supply source, incremented with donations and supply from the African Union, as well as bilateral contracts. Multiple vaccines will now be used in country. They already are, and the data from WHO showing that already there are 4 on average, and this will be soon increasing. And the maximum is so far 9. So multiple vaccines means creating, handling, and administration challenges. This is kind of what you would look like if you had 7 vaccines, either the 7 EUL vaccines seen here, and handling different vaccines with different requirements. Each of them brings complexity for the supply chain and healthcare workers. The 4 here, for example, they have to be frozen, and they have specific frozen or ultra cold chain requirements, and each of those 4 also have specific thawing requirements, either in a fridge or at room temperature. And out of those same 4, one of them has to be reconstituted, and you have to remember the other one, another one has to be diluted. When all are thawed and stored at 2 to 8, each of them has an effectively different shelf life, ranging from 2 years to 2 hours, as seen across this range of vaccines. So quite a challenge. This photo is illustrative of that challenge. And so just imagine if a VVM was put onto all of those vials, how helpful this would be to the healthcare worker. So far, it is only Sinopharm which has made the decision to put on a VVM for supply to LMICs. The vaccine is currently arriving as we speak in multiple countries with a VVM on each single dose vial, helping the supply chain managers and healthcare workers handle and administer vaccines. The value VVM brings is on the following slides. Having a VVM fits in existing SOPs as the VVM is expected to be on the vials. VVMs are on practically all vaccines in LMIC government programs. Hence, it is not surprising healthcare workers would prefer them, as is confirmed in 2 recent surveys in Africa. Anecdotally, we have heard that during COVAX coordination calls with Gavi and global partners, EPI managers have actually been asking for VVM. So far, only Sinopharm has responded, but we do understand at least one other company will put a VVM onto LMIC supply. Another really important value of VVM is in facilitating redistribution of vaccine. If you see the quote from Seth Berkley here, when distribution problems emerge, move the vaccines. And we've seen large quantities of vaccine needed to be redistributed in several places, e.g. in DR Congo, and we're recently hearing about the same type of issue for donated vaccines in high-income countries. And this is likely to increase with more supply arriving in the LMICs. VVM unequivocally can confirm that cold chain storage conditions have been maintained. So it's extremely helpful. And finally, as recently endorsed by US Pharmacopoeia, VVM can help to confront the challenge of substandard vaccine as well as falsified vaccine. Perhaps it's not very well known, but by simply boiling an empty vial with a VVM on in a plastic bag for a few minutes, the VVM can confirm whether the product is counterfeit, as the inner square will go dark, and if you look, that's the sign that shows you that the vaccine has now been heat exposed and should not be used. So in conclusion, VVM will help COVID vaccine rollout over the next year. And currently, the decision to apply the VVM is with the supplier. Here are the standard VVM lead times. If you are considering a VVM, we know the field wants VVM, and we believe that as vaccine quantities build up in country, so will the need for VVMs. This section is an update on the strategic opportunity for digitization of temperature sensors, specifically VVM and PTTI, or peak threshold temperature indicators. The background to this is the momentum being gained in digital and mHealth innovations over some time now. Global health institutions have been strongly signaling this, if you see the quotes from WHO and Gavi leaders on the slide. And now the COVID pandemic has very clearly demonstrated the value of mHealth, with multiple apps, QR codes, vaccination certificates, health passes being used around the world, including in LMICs. A great example of a beneficiary area of mHealth is the progress in logistics management information systems, or track and trace. Countries are getting stronger and stronger support on LMIS implementation from various multilateral partners. Here, Gavi and Global Fund have shortlisted 7 providers, and these providers are engaged in pilots, and several are going to scale in these countries. WHO TechNet are currently right now running a series of webinars in association with the COVID Digital Health Center of Excellence called Deploying an Electronic LMIS, Making the Right Choice. These systems are making increasing use of barcodes, potentially at all the packaging levels, and DCVMN manufacturers have been and are reacting to this track and trace opportunity, with GS1 barcodes being used, examples of use at all packaging levels, tertiary, secondary, and primary, even serialized. See the examples from Biopharma, Sinopharm, and Serum on the slide. And finally, here is a reminder of the UNICEF Gavi requirement for barcodes on secondary packaging, which is the end of this year, December 31st, of which you are no doubt aware. So what about the implementation of an electronic or eVVM? Well, the vials will continue to have standard VVMs visually checked by the healthcare worker in the classic way. However, we anticipate a GS1 compliant 2D barcode will eventually be on the vial, and inside this barcode it's the embedded VVM chemistry, the same chemistry that you have in the classic VVM. So here, by scanning the barcode, which captures the GTIN information, in addition, the VVM status will be electronically captured and automatically be updating the LMIS or any local data lake system that you may have. We're also moving forward with the other temperature sensor, a PTTI, peak threshold temperature indicator, this time in a rapid diagnostic test. It's slightly different to the VVM, but instead of turning dark cumulatively exposed to heat, it turns dark rapidly at 40 degrees centigrade. This is for an RDT used for COVID-19, and we're also looking at one for malaria. You may not know also that RDTs are temperature sensitive, like vaccines, where even a 10-minute exposure to 37 degrees centigrade can cause failure. A PTTI indicator is also inside the barcode, and we have a field study being carried out in Indonesia, and this field study is showing that by scanning the barcode on the RDT, it captures the product information, but also signals to the healthcare worker, do not use this unit. Healthcare workers can be assured that the test has not been heat compromised, improving trust and confidence in the result. And of course, the data is pushed to the patient information record as well. So we believe that digitized sensors have great potential. They will not just bring a temperature assurance, but also this linkage to LMIS and HMIS, which in turn brings a kind of big data or triangulation opportunity. And people are really beginning to recognize this. As we saw during the SAGE meeting recently, we saw European experts recognizing some of these opportunities with COVID track and trace, improving data. And then in addition, product authentication is improved, serialized supply chain tracking is enabled, and an additional layer of anti-counterfeiting is possible. Here is our development timeline. We started in 2014. The Zebra's acquisition of Temptime in 2019 has accelerated progress on this critical path, adding Zebra's appropriate proprietary decoding algorithms, helping run successful proof of concept pilots and increasing R&D efforts. Before closing, a quick call out to our partners, Subhash Chandir, IRD Pakistan, and Anurag Shankar in Indonesia, part of Oxford University. We are looking forward to advancing the development of robust solutions suitable for all users in all environments. Don't forget to visit the virtual booth in the exhibition hall, and looking forward to seeing you all in person, hopefully next year. Thank you.
You're muted, Patrick.
Mute myself. Sorry, apologies, John. Thanks so much for that overview. Very exciting to see the evolution of your technology and the potential that it holds in terms of making a difference to how these vaccines are handled in the field, where where it matters most. Thanks so much. I'm very cognizant of the clock ticking on. So Fernando, over to you.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you all the panelists for your presentations. We heard different important things about the African continent and how to approach this challenge. Definitely, it was mentioned the need of capital, intense and labor qualification. And it seems like all the parts are coming together, and little by little we are approaching the challenge of Africa. Definitely, we heard that it's not only capital and financing mechanism what we need, but also support from technical and training, and part of our partners in the network share their views on this and what they are doing and the actions that are already occurring. So we have only 1 minute left. I'm sorry, we won't have time to respond some of the questions that are in the Q&A. One of them was already answered, but we can connect offline. But I want to thank again all the panelists and Patrick for moderate this session. Definitely, it was very important to understand the landscape in Africa and the challenges to promote and to pursue the African production for Africa. And our members in the developing countries vaccine manufacturers network, the companies manufacturing vaccines in other low and middle income countries have a unique opportunity and knowledge on how to approach this challenge in Africa. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to also remind everyone to visit the exhibition booths. The exhibitors have prepared their service offerings and product offerings, and it's just at the click of a button that you'll have access to their materials. So do visit the exhibition booths. There were 2 questions posed in the Q&A, as Fernando said, and we appreciate those questions. The second set, we will certainly apply our minds to that. Thanks so much, Fernando. Thanks, everyone.